Welcome, everybody, and I hope that you're not suffering too much from a hangover as a result of last night's party. Georges Simon is here, so I expect more people to come to this panel, which I think is very, very important. You will sort of know the quote that I've based my opening statement on, which is, "This is all about accountability to the people by the people." So this is extremely important. We know that with the 2030 agenda, with the 17 SDGs, that's really a social contract between the states and the people. And the states have to produce quality data, and the people have to have access to it. It has to be meaningful, it has to be relevant, and of course they have to have the right to generate their own data. So that's the social contract. And we have some great speakers. I'm going to present to you Soima Kidambi, who's joining us virtually from Telangana state in India, and she is the director of the Society for Social Audits, Accountability and Transparency at the Department of Rural Development. So we're going to be hearing from her in a moment. We have Aiden Ayakuzi, Executive Director of Twaweza, an NGO that's all about amplifying citizens' voices and holding governments to account in Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Aiden is also a board member of the Global Partnerships for Sustainable Development Data and civil society co-chair of the Open Government Partnership. We have Frida Githuku, who's Executive Director of Groots Kenya, an NGO that's building a grassroots women's movement in Kenya. And, of course, we have someone who's very familiar to you now, Georges Simon Ulrich, Director General of the Swiss Federal Statistical Office. As ever, we really want to hear your questions, so we will allow a lot of time. Those of you who are joining us virtually, thank you so much, and please do start putting your questions in the Q&A. Again, the message to amplify the voice and the impact of this forum outside these four walls, so please do tweet using hashtag UN Data Forum or @Road2Burn. But first, we are going to hear from our keynote speaker, Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, who has this video message for us about the importance of investing in data to achieve the SDGs.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to address you on the critical issue of data accountability. Data is how we drive change. Data empowers, data is the lifeblood of planning. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, our global blueprint for action, includes some 230 indicators across 17 goals. Without data on these indicators, it is impossible to track progress and to hold each other accountable. Similarly, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how open data can drive advocacy. Data revealed the gross inequalities in global vaccine distributions, for instance, and data makes the case that this must change. The point is, data in the hands of the citizen is the key to transparency and therefore accountability. Moving forward, we need to bolster investment in better data, analytics and standards everywhere, and we must focus especially on empowering those most at risk of being left behind. This is why I'm excited about the launch of the two initiatives at this year's forum that will scale international investments in data for people and planet. First, a global data facility will help enhance the general availability, quality and usability of data around the world. It will strengthen the capacity of national statistical systems to bridge major data gaps. At the same time, we need extra investment in data ecosystems that prioritize the most vulnerable. We need data to better anticipate, prevent and respond to crises in the world's most fragile settings. Therefore, the UN and the international partners are launching the Complex Risk Analytics Fund. These two instruments will work in unison to drive data progress everywhere, foster responsible data use, and put the needs of the most vulnerable first. With the 2030 agenda hanging in the balance, investing more in data has never been more urgent. Let us put data to work for a better and a more sustainable and safer world for all. Thank you.
There we are, and as we heard from the Deputy Secretary General there, it's all about putting data in the hands of the citizens for transparency and accountability. And first of all, we're going to hear from our non-governmental groups about what they're doing to keep governments accountable. And we're going to start, though, with Salmia, because the SSAT, I understand, was set up to run social audits as a result of a law that was enacted to combat poverty in India. And this law seems very progressive. It was aimed to generate or guarantee 100 days of work at the minimum wage for, I suppose, what we might call the poorest of the poor, but please correct me. But the idea is that they are working on projects that benefit the community. And this is done all over India, but the state where Salmia works is one of the most progressive. So Salmia, just tell us a little bit about how these audits work.
Thanks, Claire. The public audit and the now evolving social audit process actually evolved from the freedom of information movement in India, which began with poor people asking government for their wages on public works. They coined the slogan, "Our money, our accounts." So the social audit, in a nutshell, is our money, our accounts. People being informed how money they pay as taxpayers is being spent by government. Of the two kinds of people's audits that have evolved, public audits, or Jan Sunwais, are facilitated by civil society organizations using official data in which the government can choose not to engage or even act on the findings. However, in the case of the legally mandated social audit, government is duty-bound to be present and engage with the entire process. The process has four essential components, which by law is to be facilitated by an independent agency like the one I head in Telangana, set up and funded by the government, but functioning independent of the government. The four steps involve providing and disseminating information to the people, verification of the information by the beneficiaries on the ground, providing a fear-free, enabling public platform in the form of a public hearing, and ensuring officials of the implementing agency are present and respond to the questions by the people. And finally, acting on the objections that are raised through a follow-up process with well-defined protocols for the action to be taken on each issue. The process itself is driven by the beneficiaries and people who benefit from the scheme.
These beneficiaries, I mean, how do they feel when somebody goes to them, to their villages and checks that they have received this money? How does that make them feel?
I see the whole process of the social audit as being an encouragement to the citizens and the beneficiaries to ask questions. That itself is an empowering process. That governments are legally bound to provide them a platform where they can come ask questions without any fear, and that government representatives have to be present to answer those questions itself is possibly I see it as the single largest mass contact program to verify both data and the outcomes of a welfare scheme being implemented by government.
Because you imagine, and I've visited India and been to these villages, that often these people feel very disempowered and that they can't have their voice heard, perhaps at the village committees or the elders of the committees. And this is a way of giving them a voice.
Yes, so while there is no government that doesn't demand accountability, the social audits in turn makes governments accountable to people. It is, according to me, an institutionalized, participatory, democratic process and gives people a share of governance while empowering them. And in return, the feedback that comes from this process actually helps in the way in which the scheme gets implemented.
Because that's important too, isn't it? Is that you're also not only auditing that these people have been paid, but the scheme has actually been done. So it's a deterrent to corruption.
Yes, absolutely. So if you see the fact that every worker and every single work and every single transaction is being scrutinized publicly, acts as a deterrent because people then worry about doing something wrong. And governments can be more confident that the money that has been spent well and actually reach those who, to whose hands they want to transfer those benefits. Without leakages, without any other form of, allegations that can then be leveled at government by anybody. So it's government laying itself bare and saying, I'm open to scrutiny, I'm willing to share this information, scrutinize and give me feedback.
So it works with this particular program, this social welfare program for the poorest of the poor. Can it be extended? Can it be scaled up for other social welfare programs?
Well, it started with a legal mandate that was incorporated into the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. But subsequently, there have been 4 other acts in India, the National Food Security Act, the Juvenile Justice Act, which have actually incorporated the concept of social audits. But I would say it's not just limited to India. I've been part of a process in Kenya where civil society organizations actually monitored the Constituency Development Fund, asking for more accountability and transparency in how those funds were utilized. And with the janitorial services in South Africa, so it's not a concept that is limited to only one country. It's something that transcends boundaries because ultimately welfare schemes are driven with the idea of benefits reaching the poorest of the poor, the most marginalized sections of society. And so giving them an opportunity, giving them the right, in fact, which is, of course, a fundamental right for them as well, to look into how benefits are being given out and how a scheme is being implemented is often a question of life and death for the poor. So I think this is very useful. To give the example of, say, COVID vaccines, to know who's got it, why someone else has not got it, and what have they done not to receive it. It brings everybody onto the same platform.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Soumya. I mean, that's great. And we can see from her examples that Africa's good at this. So I'm going to go to you, Aidan, because there you've got government which is really promoting social accountability through sharing official data. Now, your organization is doing mobile surveys on political and social issues and generating data, this citizen-generated data. So give us a few ideas about what sort of topics do you address in these surveys?
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. We address quite a number of topics. So let me start with one example from before I joined the organization, and that is the taxation of mobile services. I think it was in 2013, the administration in Tanzania put a flat tax of 1,000 shillings, then maybe around 50 cents per month per SIM card on all the mobile phone subscribers. And we thought, this is a very regressive tax. Why should my grandmother in the village pay the same as I do to have a mobile phone? So we asked Tanzanians, what do you think of this SIM card tax? And you can imagine the answer, we don't like. 80% of them said we don't like this. And the wonderful thing was, we did this survey in July. By October, the government then decided that they were going to remove the flat tax and put an excise tax on airtime, a lot more progressive tax. So that was a great example of using citizen voice to shape public policy. And there are others. So we look at things like public service delivery, water and the quality of water, or health service delivery, or food security, or social attitudes. This one is an interesting one. We asked what Ugandans felt about refugees. And we found that the population in Uganda is actually very welcoming of refugees. So there isn't a sense of animosity and difference and distance with them. We asked in Tanzania about whether teen mothers ought to go back to publicly funded primary and secondary education. And overwhelmingly, 70% of them said yes, maybe even while she was still pregnant, but certainly after she has given birth, she ought to go back and finish her education in the publicly funded system. So we used this when the government changed its policy a couple of years ago, saying, no, we're not going to let teen girls back into the publicly funded education system, at least the primary schools, because they have a bad influence on the other students. But we had this number, this data, to say, but the public in Tanzania think otherwise. So we're still using this to advocate for the return of teen girls back.
And I just wondered, do they ever use you? Do they actually ever say, would you please go and look at X?
Not necessarily for some of these ones, but they have asked us, for example, around COVID. And in Kenya and in Uganda, and especially in Uganda, we have a very good engagement with the Ministry of Health in Uganda around COVID-19. What are the attitudes? How are people really protecting themselves from the virus? Where are the hotspots? So we actually sampled not just the whole country of Uganda, but 3 hotspots, 3 entry points for COVID-19. So we do have that relationship with them.
But I suppose there are some subjects, you're just mentioning Uganda, of course there's the law there that homosexuality is a crime. I think there's even a 10-year prison sentence. So I imagine that there are certain subjects that you can't do citizen-generated data on?
There are certain subjects that we don't poll because I think even the citizens themselves would push back on that. So we don't necessarily drive an agenda, social engineering agenda. We do try and get a sense, just like our friends in India, it's a form of social accountability. Are the citizens feeling like the government is providing services to the quality and at expectation that they require? And where there are gaps, we will communicate this to the government, and hopefully they will act on it.
You say hopefully they will act on it. Do you sometimes find they sort of just bury it and they don't act, and then what do you do?
Yeah, they do. I think I'd be naive to think that everything we tell governments they sort of grab and run with. But I think, the tax example was a good one. But there are others, such as this one about pregnant girls going back to school, which is they have not acted on it immediately. So we have to use it to advocate. What I think sometimes happens, and maybe others can comment on this, is that it's not instinctive for a government to say, well, civil society said this, so we must act on it, right? I don't think that's not really the attitude. But they will sometimes call you quietly and say, let's have a conversation about this. How do we make it, how do we move the agenda forward? And then they will take the credit, and that's fine. As long as the policy or the issue is addressed and they take that's fine. We're not in it to compete for brownie points.
Yeah. So there is this symbiotic relationship, as you say, between you and the government. What about the people, the citizens? Do they really feel that through this process they've got a voice?
Well, when we finish, we enter into sort of an agreement with our respondents. Just to tell the audience, we get a panel of respondents in each country, which ranges in size from 2,000 to 3,000 people. And so at the end of 2 or 2.5 years, we go back to them and say, thank you very much, you participated. And here are some of the outcomes that emerged out of your opinion. And a few of them have told us it's great because I've heard my voice in the policy changes that have happened. And in fact, in my community, people know that I'm one of your respondents, so they come to me with ideas, with complaints, with issues that maybe ought to be raised in future surveys, because we know it reaches the ears of those who can do something about it.
That's really interesting, isn't it? This sort of loop back that we've been discussing, that it's so important that citizens find how their data has been used. Frida, you're also collecting data generated by women. Can you explain a little bit about how you collect the data and on what sort of subjects?
Thank you, Claire. GROOTS is a civil society organization, and we are a network of 3,500 community groups working on gender equality and women empowerment, so we are an advocacy organization. Our interest is very much in data, but specifically on gender data, so we are interested in closing the gaps in gender data using both the official statistics, but also citizen-generated data. So the way we collect data is that we use very community-led participatory methods. Every data collection process is anchored on a specific advocacy agenda that we are pursuing. So we do not collect data for the sake of doing it. We appreciate that there is a National Statistical Office that is in charge of that. So there's a specific agenda, advocacy agenda that we are pursuing that is a priority to the local community where we are working. And we work with them from A to Z. A meaning that they are part of deciding what kind of questions should feature in the survey instrument, in the questionnaire. Of course, we train them also as enumerators. Largely, they are rural women and youth. They are the enumerators who will go out and administer that tool. In the yesteryears, we used to do paperwork. We no longer do that. Now we are using mobile phone. We do the analysis of the data. At that level, we outsource specialists or experts. And after that, we do validation, where these communities are also heavily engaged in validating the results, but most importantly, dissemination and using that data for advocacy. That is our end goal. We want to have that data so that we can host a policy discussion with policymakers, we can talk with politicians, and the women and the young men and young women, they engage in that entire value chain. GROOTS is an old organization, so we are 26 years old. So over time, we've built relationship and trust with different government agencies. That's a good platform to ensure that then you are having continuous policy dialogue with them because they trust you, they want to hear your voice. The other thing is because we are a movement and we have so many community group members, these people doubles up as voters. So they enjoy a certain political attention from politicians that they cannot ignore. So it means we also leverage on that political capital to use the evidence we've collected to push for certain agenda, whether it is water or it's a health facility that we are pursuing. And of course, in Kenya, there is also the constitutional provision for public participation. With all its flaws, we also use it and exploit it for good. And this work that we do, it's not a work that you can do on your own. You know that the data space requires a lot of capacity building. So we are working with EcoMeasures 2030, who have invested heavily in building the capacity of national organization and grassroots advocate in using data for advocacy. Some of the areas that we collect data on, like violence against women and girls, women representation beyond Parliament and Senate, because that's where most of us are concentrated. But there are other spaces of decision-making, including land control boards, there are water committees that determine who gets water and who doesn't in the villages, in the community. So we are also monitoring the representation of women and men in those kind of committees. The issues of land, issues of disinheritance that are very sensitive. For you to collect that kind of data and use it and stay safe, you need a community of people around you who, first of all, are amplifying your voice, but they are also watch out because there are people who will come for you. So we also work with the International Land Coalition that has supported us to do that kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a little bit like the journalist last night. I think she said something about that we don't prioritize data over women's safety. I mean, that is, I am revealing something that may have happened and we know in our community who did it. Similarly with this land tenure, very sensitive, isn't it?
Yes.
And yes, the people who speak up could easily face some sort of intimidation.
Yeah. The good thing is that also the civil society at the country level, at an African level and global level, they are organized, and there is those peer protection mechanism that we've all put in place. That is why it is important to be part of coalition, part of consortium, not work in isolation. So for us, working with coalitions like, International Land Coalition, the SDG Kenya Forum, we feel bold enough and we are able to mobilize enough courage to zoom into issues that are otherwise very sensitive, like land rights.
And one final question, and how empowered do the women feel who take part in this process?
It's a very empowering process. First of all, engaging women as enumerators and sending them out there, you're already dragging them into mainstream development. you're increasing their visibility. I can tell you for sure that one of the immediate outcome every time we engage in this process is that some of the women that we engage in data collection, they get appointed into certain committees because every day you are telling them to go interact with a policymaker, a politician. This is someone who is in position of power and who can influence and open opportunities for them. But you're also helping them understand the environment that they live in and deepen the inequalities, meaning you're developing better advocates. By the time they are having a negotiation with a policymaker, it's a relationship of two almost equal people. You remove those power hierarchies or imbalances, which is very important if you're to advance a development agenda. So it's a very empowering process, and you're equipping them with evidence.
Great. So we've heard there, George, what's being done, to keep their governments accountable. You're producing data. So just tell us about, how do you make the data, accessible? What's your role as you see it?
First, I want to say something, what Frida was saying. This is really a huge pleasure to hear that. Yeah. This is exactly the way we have to go. Yeah. And it's really fantastic to hear that. Maybe it's the power of Zachary also helping working together, the former Director General of the Statistical Office.
In Kenya.
In Kenya.
He's progressive.
Yeah, no, really, because this is exactly the point. It's exactly the point. I mean, we always, I don't have to tell it here. I mean, we always say that we have to strengthen national statistical office. Of course, that's true. But that's not enough. I mean, it has to be examples like Frida was telling, that people start working together and then they make visible what they do. Mm-hmm. And if you want to make a data-driven decision, I mean, you have what is actually the question we want to answer? This is the first step. And then what kind of data do we have? And you need the platform to talk about the data. And you have to make it visible. If it's not visible, you cannot talk about anything. It's just you don't know how a product is developed. So you need that at the first point. I will say something about that in a minute. And then the second, of course, is that when you do then a product out of it, that it also has been discussed. Of course, for official statistics, we're the one who doing then the definition, if you want to say how we build up a GDP. But this is not about the truth, it's about a basis of reference that people then work with. And the more people are empowered to understand what it is and they refer to that definition, the better you can make evidence-based decision-making. And the third is then that there are a huge community of people who know to do something with data. So it's not only the statisticians, but it's also that community. So when they have access to the data, they can also do analytic things, or you can use algorithms, or you have to know how the data is, where it's coming from, and things like that. But you can also learn in the community. And this is, I think, for the statistical offices, one of the most important elements, that they not just saying we have to do it and you have to work with me and let's do it and we should and we should. The most important thing is doing it. So that means when we collect data, we have to make the data visible. And this is, of course, accessible. But in the first strategy, there is incredible amount of data all over the world. Mm-hmm. But normally, 99% you cannot use because it's a different kind of format. You don't know where it's coming from, and I mean, we don't talk about machine readable. So that's why the first thing is, because quite often it's also difficult that you can see it because people say, oh, it's secure, it's, the privacy and things like that. And of course, we have good progress on the level of open data, but even there, we have different formats. So what we actually need is, the statistical office should also play the role as data stewards, saying we have something to, like we have a definition for the GDP, a definition on what kind of format do we take, what kind of standard. It's XML or whatever, DCAP. And then if people start describing their data, then you can see it. So you can build a searching engine on metadata.
Does that happen enough? Data stewardship?
No. I mean, Amina was talking about it actually, but it's like on a high level. I mean, and that's one of the problems that we are always saying we have to. Maybe the pandemic helped us to make this role more visible. And of course, as most of you are statisticians, most people say, oh, we are independent of the politicians. Yeah, we are maybe independent, but we are relevant to them. And it is, I mean, to show what we have doesn't affect our independency. I mean, that people can see what we have. But the same thing has to happen also for everyone who's collecting data. And then you make, when you describe your data, and you can see on a metadata catalog, you can see what we have. And then, of course, you can discuss about the quality, because we often say that it's important that the data is qualitatively high. Okay, what is quality? Quality is a name. We are the ones defining what is quality. And then we can say the first thing is to make that visible. So actually, every statistical office should also overtake their role to be a data steward, fighting for it, going to their board of ministers and say, hey, we want to have this role because we are the one who can make that visible, and we're not politicized, I would say. Because we have to also be true. I mean, most of you who are using data to make decisions, they also have a normative thinking. They want to reach something. They will have a goal, an aim. So if you just interpret your data like you want it, so that shouldn't be the evidence-based decision-making process. So that's why it's good if your data is discussed on a place, and the official statistical office could play this role. And
it'd be interesting to know about accessibility, though, and actually how do you make it, understandable to the citizens?
If you describe the data, you can write in the description. That's the metadata. The data stays wherever they are, but the metadata you have a description. Then you can see, is it open data? Do I have access? Who has collected it? What can I do with it? And this is like the first step. And the second step, of course, is then you have, like Frida was saying in an example, you have to talk to them and telling them what they can do, how they can learn out of that data. So in Switzerland, we built a data science center, a center for data science, where you not only have the classical deductive way of doing analytics, indicator systems and so on, but also the new ways like in the inductive way of doing analytics, like deep learning, using algorithms. And there, of course, you also need to have the discussion about the data, because if you take an algorithm to do something, there is also some bias already within the data. You need to discuss it, and then we have to go in a way where we learn. It's also kind of an ethical thing. I mean, we don't know now or today whatever we have kind of problems. So that way, it's something that we have to learn on that way. And it has to be exactly like Frida was saying. I mean, then you have to have this community and you learn together. Of course, you need to have someone who has a kind of a science independency of saying, if you have to make a definition, someone has to decide that, and that should be the statistical office, as we do it for every indicator system, we also do the framework.
So what is I'm just wondering what your criteria is. I mean, with citizen-generated data, the sort of data that Aidan produces, I mean, how do you assess that? What's your criteria?
If he describes the data, that you can make it visible in the metadata catalog, it's open for everyone. I mean, you're deciding then who has access, but then it makes it visible. It's like, I could say like a Google for data. I mean, you're not getting access to the data, but you see what data you have. And in my view, this is a basic service that a government should do for their citizens. And of course, it's something when we work together, also data from private sector, data from civil society, all data, if it is described the same way, we can make it visible. Technically, this is easily done. And I'm also sure that doesn't cost so much, because everyone has to describe data somehow. But we should do it the same way.
I mean, I'm just picking up on something that one of the panelists, and I think everybody who attended the discussion on leaving no one behind, was quite struck by Jose Vieira, the president of the World Blind Union. And he said something which wasn't totally explained, but he said that national statistics offices often don't accept data from disability groups. Why would that be? I mean, is that because they're seen as a vested in interest?
I don't know the specific case, but of course, I mean, basically, we wouldn't collect data if the data would be in the quality somewhere else. At least in Switzerland, it's like this. And you know, quite often it is like this, that if you have a group, they say, we have data, and quite often this data you have to discuss it really, is it really good data for using for a product? Because, as I said, there are 3 steps actually doing an information product that you can make your decision based on it. And so the quality of the data is something which is very important and a crucial point. So for the product we do in official statistics, we really are responsible for the whole value chain from A to Z. But in the world of data ecosystem, we are an enabler. There we're not making a product and saying this is official statistics, but there we're saying, here you can see the data. And this is kind of another role. And quite often, this second role I was talking now is not so really implemented all over the world, but it started. And I mean, you see countries doing that more and more. In Switzerland, we implemented that by the beginning of this year. You see also New Zealand, you see Estland. They start building that up, and then they play another role. And I'm quite confident that within a couple of years, maybe we pick up the discussion again, and then we will say, okay, just put it on the platform of metadata. Also, you put it there, I mean, you just describe the data, and you can see. So a community can start having a discussion on that data. And probably suddenly, something like Frida was saying, some people come and say, hey, for us, this is good data. We have taken it there, and it helps us to do something. So I think it needs a bit time, but at the end, to answer your question, we don't do enough in that field today. I mean, Amina actually was saying it, but we have to do it. Even the UN has to do it. Even we, as statisticians, have to do it. Everyone here have to do it.
Understood. I'm just wondering about, the quality of your data. How do you make sure that you've got the best chances of, your data being accepted as credible data? What do you do to make sure that?
So we actually work with the National Statistics offices. That's vital. When we're doing surveying, we have to sample, and we use the sample frames, sorry for all that technical jargon, that National Statistics offices provide. So we go out there, and they provide them to us. They randomize it so that we can make sure we get as representative a sample, whether it's national or subnational, as we can. And so that's the rigor part of it. We don't want to compromise on the rigor. But the other thing that I think is important is that it's independence. Just as the National Statistics Office want to be independent of the politicians, civil society organizations are also independent of other vested interests, except, hopefully, the interests of the populations with which we are working. So that independence is important. This also builds credibility, methodological credibility, but also track record of a person like Groot's been there for 20 years and others, so that the people know and trust the product that you're putting out there. But finally, and I think it's to Georges Simon's point about engagement. So he says, make the data visible, but also we have to translate the data so that people understand, whether they're policymakers or the people who collected the data or the people from whom the data was collected need to understand, what does this mean? What is the picture that is being drawn?
And how do you do that?
We at Tuawez, and I'm sure Groups does the same thing, actually spend quite a bit of energy and effort and resources in going back to the communities. For example, if we collect data on an issue, we will have a press conference, we will write briefs, we will make sure that the briefs are in understandable language, we will engage in social media conversations to try and get people to say, hey, this is the insight that this collection of data has done. And then we will engage the policymakers. Let me give you an example in which we invested a lot of money, and we borrowed it from India, actually. India has Pratham, an organization which does an annual assessment of learning outcomes. Huge, it's collected by citizens themselves, one-on-one in the household. And the question that is being asked is disarmingly simple. Yes, our children are in school, but are they learning? And that's a question that every parent wants to know. Is my kid learning? So we borrowed from India. We did these huge surveys for many years to answer that question, and the answer was often, not enough of them are learning enough. And so we had to go and use this data to talk to the policymakers. Yes, you're building infrastructure and hiring teachers and desks and everything else, but you know what? That investment is much lower in its return in terms of learning outcomes than it could be. So focus on learning outcomes. So we try to do that kind of advocacy, and others have jumped in to try and promote the learning outcome metric of our education system investment.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's like my profession. It's about the questions. Have you got the right questions? And that was a very clever question. Frida, your data, how do you ensure it's credible so that it's used?
I think for any entity to produce credible data, first of all, you as an entity, you have to be credible, and you must earn enough public trust. So the first audit is for you as an institution, and even as the leader of that institution, are you credible? What kind of culture has you cultivated, institutional culture, that the public see and they can trust what you're producing? But beyond that, also, of course, there are research ethics that are available publicly. We are working with the National Statistical Office, so we also enjoy some capacity building from them. And we make sure that we follow all the protocols that's laid down. We are also subjecting the data that we collect to feedback, criticism. We put it in the open. Groots actually has a gender dashboard. It's www.genderdatakenya.org, where all the data that either we've collected and analyzed and visualized, or the data is from the official statistic database that we are reanalyzing and visualizing. You can see it's up, it's in the open, and we allow people to give feedback and to even criticize what we've put out there. Yeah.
Soima, if you'd like to reflect on anything that you've heard, and also about your data collection, how is it credible? And I'm also wondering, what about when there's some sort of critical statements or something that criticizes the government of Telangana, or what happens then? So please, come into the conversation.
I'm actually going to start with something George said, and basically, while there is a whole lot of data that's being collected by governments and by independent agencies, by CSOs, the producers of the data, from whom we actually collect the data, are not privy to that data at the end. Most of this data is hidden behind admin logins. It's called a management information system, and there's a reason why it's called MIS, because it's all for management purposes. It's not a people's information system. Like in India, we say the Janta information system, where you're putting out information for the users or the producers of the data to be able to see what exactly has been collected, how it's been interpreted, and how they can engage with that data. The only state that I think which has done that in recent times is the state of Rajasthan, where the government has in fact put out what is known as a People's Information Portal, or a Jan Suchna portal, where every single department's information is real time and put out there on a transactional basis. Anybody can go and see that data. Now, as far as the data that we are validating through the social audit process is concerned, this is real-time data that is related to the right to work scheme, where we take the data from the MIS and again collect it from the local offices, and we cross-reference and validate it at the field level. So this is real-time information that is collected and then cross-referenced once again. So you're going house to house asking people, did you work? Did you get paid? Did this work take place? Were you at this work site? Did you work at this work site? And if there are data issues, we flag that with government. Of course, there are times when you will end up finding a work that was not done as per specification. There would be issues where somebody whose work is shown as dead and therefore has not been able to receive their wages. The social audit process actually flags those issues, and I would say that the government has been very specific in responding to make sure that any such grievance that comes is acted upon. But I feel the bottom line is that data collected from individuals, from society, from citizens must feed back to citizens. And hiding them behind information systems, keeping them opaque, hiding them behind user logins, and is actually not a way in which to engage. And the best way to engage is actually put out that data. Just like Frida said, our organization puts out information. The same thing should be done by government. That's something that is fundamental and paramount.
Thank you very, very much, Soumya. George, I just want to come back to communicating, this data, the data products that come out of your office, perhaps working with other ministries. Is the one that you're particularly proud of that you think has been easily understandable by the citizens of Switzerland, of which I am one?
Oh, it's not so easy to answer. I think, official statistical information is well known, and almost everybody knows.
Yeah. The newborns, as we saw last night in the discussion, but gender equality, you've done stuff on that, haven't you? And gender pay parity and all of these quite tricky things to understand.
Absolutely. This is one of the most difficult jobs to produce information that people understand. Mm-hmm. But it's also important that those decision makers making decisions understand the information, and that it's also based on what we produce. And this is sometimes the more difficult job, because the one we give out, they're also the medias taking it, and they're a multiplier. Mm-hmm. If we talk about communication, it's not only about producing the information and then let's do whatever you want. It is also to get people involved to understand what do I gonna do now. For that, you need to have these communities. You need to have like sounding boards talking together with them. So we have to go to the other departments, asking them what kind of data do you really need? Is it the data that you can use? Things like that. So this is how we make our multi-annual program. We build it up based on the needs, what kind of information people need. But of course, the amount of information that people actually would need is bigger than we actually have money. That's the first thing in communication. The second, which I think is much more difficult, is what I was talking before about this second or third role that official statistics have. When people say, okay, give me your data, this is just a little part of the story. To tell them you have to be engaged with us is also, you have to invest there, that you have groups you can discuss and things like that. So communication is actually a multi-stakeholder process and a multi-issue process. So you have to identify the issues and the stakeholders, so you make a kind of a grid. And then you have an incredible amount of communities you have to communicate with them. So sometimes I think it's more kind of business of influence, not in a negative, manipulative sense. It's more like educate people on that way so that those people multiply and communicate then based on the data we have. And this part is much more difficult because, it's like most of the people working at the FSO, they're working for producing statistics. So now I'm telling them, go out to the people, start doing communities. Say, okay, and who is doing the work? So communication is a quite complex thing, which is not so easy to answer. And at the end of the day, we would actually have to ask Swiss citizens what is their perception of us, and then maybe you could get a better answer.
That's the next Monty Python video. Aidan and Frida.
Yes.
Frida.
Let me weigh in on this. The National Statistical Offices will produce data for the public and for other state agencies. It will not be necessarily tailored to a certain audience. And that's where other partners come in, so that they can help reanalyze that data and present it in a manner that it can be consumed by people of different capacities, people from different constituencies. But I also do not want to engage in a partnership that is just about disseminating data. We want to engage in a partnership from stage A, the production of it, all the way to the dissemination of data. And I say this because Kenya has a good example. Kenya is implementing the Women Count program under the leadership of the Bureau, the National Statistical Agency, and the UN Women. And they've created an active space for civil society to engage. It's called the Interagency Committee on Gender Statistics. In that stage, in that group, I represent civil society organization. And even when they are designing the tools, let's say for time use survey, we are part of designing those tools. So by the time the time use survey report comes out, I already know the rhythm, the steam, how the process was, and I can relate with that product as an institution or as a representative of civil society. So it's very easy for us to invest in dissemination of something that we fully identify with. So engagement in that entire value
Yeah,
chain.
the ownership.
I was gonna-
Aidan,
I
and
was-
then I'm going to ask people for a quick reflection before we go to the audience.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. Georges Simon, we are a solution here. We can help national statistics officers communicate these complicated, difficult concepts to the public. We can help mine the data that you have for those nuggets of insight that are of interest to various populations. Sometimes it feels like civil society is competing with the National Statistics Office for primacy in the data collection. Civil society will never win that particular war, right? But I think we can really collaborate together on that. And maybe just a quick note, the government of Tanzania is going through or starting a review of its statistical master plan. And what I'm hearing is that they will think about involving and engaging non-traditional sources of data or citizen-generated data, which is fantastic. So I think if we're part of that conversation, as Frida said, then the communication becomes that much easier for the statistics office and that much more effective in terms of the insights and the use that the data is given.
Thank you very much. You've all started to talk about partnerships and what you need. I've got so many questions coming in from the audience. I was going to take them, but
I
please,
just want to make a quick answer. I think this is absolutely the right way to go. But it's also, I was talking before a bit about the visibility of data, but actually, at the end of the day, it's also the reusable of the data. So that at the moment we're collecting data, that we think about that someone else could also use it. But quite often we are collecting the data just for one reason, and then it actually is not usable for something else. But if people who collecting data they take their obligation to think about not only to make it visible but also reusable, then it's like another level of responsibility. And then the quality of data getting much better because other people can judge on that, can talk about what is the quality. And there I'm absolutely 100% sure we have to work together because then we can make the data that is collected usable, reusable. And right now that's not the case. But examples like you were saying, this is the way we have to go.
Yeah. So we've got some ideas there about strengthening the partnerships, the co-creation, the reusability. Let me just bring in Soima here on what would you like to see be improved? How could we strengthen partnerships between producers and users of data?
I think simplifying data. I mean, if you walk into a village and tell them that you've spent $1 million in their village on 50 or 100 different works, it's not going to make sense to them. I mean, it's just one broad figure. Now you break it down and you say, this is how much was allocated for each of these works. These are the people who worked, or these are the benefits that have reached this, from this government to your people in this village. Demystifying information is extremely critical. We've had examples where, you just get dumped with a data dump that you don't even know where to start or end with. So if you want people to engage, and given the kind of situation we face in India, I'm sure it's the same in places like Kenya, Tanzania, other countries where a part of the population is unlettered. They've not been to school, they don't know how to read or write. How do you then communicate information to them? I mean, we're actually also living in a world where there's a very wide technological divide. People might have access to a cell phone. They might have access to the internet. They might have access to, being able to dial a number. But do they have the ability to download information, read that information, assimilate that information, act on that information? So what government needs is a partnership with civil society organization, with citizens group, or setting up groups, which would then engage with people and, pass on information, collect information, but also pass on information or disseminate information, which then encourages a mechanism of, engagement that goes beyond just somebody producing data or taking data. And I would say it's not just the National Statistical Office that has the responsibility to do this. I think the CAG, the Comptroller and Auditor General's Office, the Supreme Audit institutions, because they are auditing government schemes. It's important now for government departments to start engaging with citizens, to see them as, as allies and not adversaries.
There we are. You've got a round of applause here. I hope you can hear it. We've got some great questions coming here. If you saw the video in the opening ceremony, it was all about cutting the Swiss National Statistics Office, which, amazingly was a proposal here. Thank goodness they failed, I say, being political. But there's a question here from Omar Saido, which says, and I'll ask Aidan and Frida this. Aidan, the question is the underfunding of data and statistics in the global south a deliberate attempt by governments to escape accountability to the citizens? So I don't know whether you know about the funding of your national statistics offices, but if they're underfunded, he's saying, is this because they want to escape accountability?
The Tanzania National Statistics Office is part of the Ministry of Finance. So they have a very short walk to get their funding.
That's good.
However, I'm not sure because I think, as Jean-Simon said, we don't have money to collect everything that people want. So it is difficult to say that they are underfunded from that perspective because they could get billions of shillings or dollars and still not collect everything that is needed. But it is a statistics office like a judiciary. Sometimes you underfund the judiciary so that it doesn't hold government to account. So I think there could be an element of that. But then again, I think the national statistics offices can have an opportunity to really showcase their value to national governments by being proactive and also by being a little bit forward-looking. I was having a conversation this morning with somebody, and we thought sometimes they can behave like historians. They tell you what happened in the past, a bit like accountants, right? But if they are able to take those statistics, and some are better than others, and really extrapolate and look out and project and predict, in important ways, I think the governments of the day will say, we need more of this.
Right.
So therefore, we need to give
Okay, they have to show their added value.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Frida, I don't know whether you can speak on the behalf of the Kenyan Statistics Office, but do you think are they underfunded? And if so, is that for a reason?
Well, I cannot speak on behalf of the Bureau, but I'll give my opinion. I think they are underfunded, and it is intentional. Yes, it is intentional because the things that governments are comfortable with collecting data on, they are not underfunded. But the things they are not comfortable on, there is no money to do it. And also the situation in Kenya, and I believe in many African countries, the funding ecosystem is very donor-controlled. And that whole thing is also very problematic. I even feel like there is this feeling that we do not want the Kenyan government to invest too much money here so that they do not have total control of the data they are producing. I always have that feeling at the back of my mind. But the funding is really political, and it is intentional, the underfunding, according to my opinion.
Do you want to say anything, George?
I mean, you always have not enough money, even. I say that staying here in Switzerland. But we could do quite a lot if we do it better together. And, it's, I would maybe say it like this, if we do it the same way, everybody, then we are more efficient, like what I was saying, doing data visible and reusable, then you can work on that and you can make value out of that. And of course, you need also to get money for that. I mean, I can make my own example. We didn't get any money for all what I was saying. And we have for every year about, I would say, 3-4% more work for the same amount of money. So I'm now since 8 years here, and then you can say, I want to see a private company who volume their productivity up to 30% within 5 or 8 years. So I would say there we do a lot, but of course it is also, I mean, we quite often talk about money. We should, when we build up a fund or something like this, it should also be coordinated. The donors, they should also work with us in that community, so they're having a better basis for legitimacy where they invest their money. I mean, it would always be like that we not have enough money. It is like that. And of course, it would also be good for, we think about to make kind of an international community to bring these people together.
The UN?
Actually, that should be the role of the UN, yeah? But then I'm not the right person sitting here at the moment, but I can do that in Switzerland. Yes. And then I think this is what we all can do, going that direction, and we also ask for that others doing that. and that they are paid good and we use the resources that we have intelligently.
So we've got so many questions here. Let me go to one for you, Soumya, which says, social audits are great tools and sources of data on delivery, and it's good to hear that they've been working on Telangana in. How is it ensured that regional or national policymakers take up the findings and recommendations of the audits? What mechanisms can be used to improve commitment to uptake? Because you said that they, do listen, but is there any, I don't know, enforcement measures that can, how can we improve that they actually do take up the findings?
So it's not just, it started with the state of Telangana and Andhra 12 years ago, in fact. But subsequently, every state now in India has a social audit society that's been set up, and that has to function independently to do these audits, facilitate these audits in the communities. On the action taken front, actually, it's very interesting. There's been a huge thrust in the last few years on, actually acting on those findings. And it's something that state governments are continuously held accountable to by the national government. What action have you taken? What action have you initiated? If money is being embezzled, have you recovered it or not? While that's there, I think that the focus on recoveries, the focus on follow-up action is needed. But parallelly, India also requires laws which can act on grievances. Corruption is something that people are forced to act upon. But grievances, if I've not got a job card, if I haven't got a benefit, why should I have to wait for a long time for it to get resolved in the files? Why is it that I can't have justice done to me as soon as possible? So one of the outcomes that I've been hoping for a very, very long time from the social audits is actually that we would have a national, grievance law, an accountability law, a social accountability law, which makes sure that grievances are acted upon immediately. Because by and large, it's not just corruption, it's individual grievances that get set aside. Because the reaction is, if I've dealt with 99.9%, 0.1% can be dealt with eventually. But that 0.1% with, a population of the size that India has is huge. So I would say, so far, it's been good.
Great. Let's go to the audience in the room here. There's a lady here who's in front of me, and the microphone will come round. Say who you are and who you would like to answer the question. I'm just seeing how many hands are up, because it may be that I have to direct traffic to one person rather than everybody. So yeah, there's quite a lot. There's a gentleman over there, but we'll start with this lady here.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Claire. My name is Sayonara. I'm speaking from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. And very, very exciting to be having this discussion on data for accountability, particularly coming from a human rights background. And we have been, throughout the forum, discussing issues of privacy, transparency, participation, and now accountability as well. And it has been really, really good to see examples from what we are hearing here of data for human rights relevance. For example, the one that Adam mentioned on education and the right to education, but also gender data, so important for the realization of human rights for women and other gender minorities. And so I wanted to, it's more of a comment, if that's okay.
It's very good if you always say, this is comment, and keep the comment to a minute, so I know. Otherwise, I'll interrupt you. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to bring then to the attention other types of human rights data, which can also be extremely relevant and important for us to complement both official statistics, but also data collected by civil society. And that's namely namely the qualitative data produced by the human rights mechanisms, the UN human rights mechanisms. We have developed an algorithm that helps links those recommendations with the SDGs, which facilitates a lot the integration of everything that we are talking about here in one language, and we hope that can be useful. Right now I was just checking on my mobile, and there is more than 200,000 of those recommendations, which are qualitative data in itself, each one of those pieces of text. So I just wanted to put it out there for the others for use. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that information. The gentleman here, and please let me know whether it's a comment or a question.
Right. My name is Daniel. I run a private company called Isoko. You collect data for several organizations. Mine is a question, and to all the panelists. So, you understand the importance of involving citizens in data collection, even taking their feedback. And FIDA was even saying that you even need to work with them to design the survey instrument. My question is, must we trust everything that comes from the citizens as the gospel truth? I'm asking this because you see situations where sometimes people intentionally give you a response because of a certain expectation that they expect from the outcome of what you are trying to do. And so in that situation, are you saying that everything that the citizens say must be taken as a gospel truth? Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good question. I know when I was a journalist and I would say, how are people going to vote? And they would never tell me, when they were going to vote something which was not politically correct. Yes, Aidan, how do you know that what the citizens are saying is the truth?
We don't take it as gospel truth. In Tanzania, we ask people, are you going to vote? Have you registered to vote? And about 98% of them said, yep, we've registered to vote. And then the voting turnout comes out, it's about 60%. We don't take it as gospel truth. There's this thing in statistics of social desirability bias. They tell you what they think you want to hear, right? But on the aggregate, right? Because we're not going to the individual, but on the aggregate, you can get a sense of, are they enjoying or not enjoying public service delivery? What are their views on the aggregate around some social questions? But then there are others, like the social audit, where it's actually pretty specific what you're asking, and there is no fudging or telling you black is white when it isn't. So our learning outcomes numbers were not an opinion. We measure the ability of children to read, write, and count, and that becomes a real hard data. And I think similar to what Frida probably has been collecting, there are some things which are not opinions, and so therefore you can have a lot more faith in what citizens are telling you about how they're experiencing the particular event.
Yeah, Frida.
Yeah, absolutely. You cannot fully trust what citizens are saying, but you can only put safeguards, either in your sampling methodology, and also make sure that in all your actions, you're not leading them to give you the answer that you're looking for. It's just about the safeguard that you put around it. Yeah.
Yes. So, who else in the audience would like to ask a question? Yes, thank you. That's Julio. There we are. I'm beginning to recognize faces, who's the Director General of the Mexican Institute.
Thank you for the introduction, Claire. It's been a pleasure talking. This is a question, and it's for all the panelists, because we're talking about accountability. That's closer to auditing government accounts and certain services. But on the other hand, we have data that's more related to statistics, which is of a different nature. It has a different purpose. So I want to know the opinion of the panelists regarding the relationship. How can statistics be useful in terms of accountability in fighting corruption of public sector delivery and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Okay, Soima, how can statistics be used in terms of fighting corruption and accountability? Let's get a quick answer from everybody, and then I'm most probably going to have to close and go to our final keynote speaker, who's very important. Soima.
So essentially, it's easier when you're doing a beneficiary-related scheme because you're getting people's feedback and you're asking people whether they've worked, not worked, they've got a benefit, not got a benefit, if they've used the health center or not. Often the kind of data that's put out is of the kind that In statistics, it's harder because, the kind of information that is put out even by government might not necessarily be accurate. You don't know if it is enough to be able to get an opinion from people or even get, often it's consolidated data. So where it is beneficiary driven, it's much easier. Welfare schemes, it's much easier. Learning outcomes, that's easier. But there are certain areas where a survey or an audit is not sufficient. You need to try and go deeper into various aspects to be able to put out a statistical or even to be able to verify statistical data.
Frida, how can statistics be used in terms of fighting corruption and accountability?
Yeah, I think you can. Of course, if the data that is being produced is authentic, often governments will not audit themselves, but I don't think that they also have a primary intention to produce manipulated data. So like for us, we've used data from economic survey to audit how the government is funding the State Department of Gender and what that means. But it's much more strategic to use those official statistics simultaneously with data from other sources on the same theme. Then you will know whether you have the right data, and of course it will be much more rich than if you're using official statistics on its own.
Yeah, double sources. Aidan.
Julio, for me, the most important part is when statistics gives you a picture of the distributional, the distribution of whatever the benefit is or what the public services is giving. Let me give you an example. Where a few years ago, I looked at all the statistics I could find around infant mortality and maternal mortality across East Africa, and it painted a picture about where it was the starkest, where the equity elements of what government is doing are most, problematic. So I would use statistics to understand how the benefit, whether it's income, healthcare, or educational outcomes, are distributed in my population or in my geography, and use that to then go to government and say, you're not being fair here, or you're being overly favorable to particular areas here. So I think for equity purposes, statistics are fantastic to use.
George.
I mean, there is a reason why we're looking for independency of statistics, because of trying to be as less politically instrumentalized as possible. And of course, I think actually the SDGs are a very good example on that. You can see on down to a national level where we have issues, where we want to be better, where less. But then actually then the work just starts there. And then of course it's everybody then asked to start going deeper into a topic when they see that there is a topic there. You can collect own data or deeper data that maybe an official statistical office can't do, but then you can also build up your arguments, then you have a basis for having a discussion, things like that. That gives you actually then the power based on a system like the SDGs, where you then can see and prove also the accountability, so you also that you have a basis to see where action is needed and where not. And there I think the official statistic can give a very good input and a highly acceptable basis. And then, of course, you need people like you who have a community fighting for their things where they see it's needed. Yeah.
So, as we've seen, accountability for the people, by the people, it's very important for the Swiss. This is why this panel was introduced into the programme. And I would now very much like to ask the Director General of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, Patricia Danzi, to say a few words and tell us what she's taken away from the discussion.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everyone. It was a very, very interesting discussion and very, very enriching. And what I liked about this discussion was that in the heart of the discussion was the accountability to the people, for the people, and that the sense of the SDGs, actually. People in the center, also in the discussion around data, and that I liked a lot. So in maybe 4 key points that I took away, when we talk about the dialogue and policy, how we can shape it with the people, what is being discussed, what is being done. I took away a lot about accountability, the state, but also the people and also the civil society. What kind of data do you take away? What kind of questions do you ask? Do you ask the right questions? How deep do you go? And how can you or not manipulate what the policy discussion might be? Maybe a few words on partnerships as well. We heard that the solution, one of the solutions, is the partnership between the statistical offices and the civil societies. And George, you mentioned the donors. And I think that is an important point. We from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, we're very proud of being part of this discussion. We provide about $8 million a year for things that are related to data, people, and the discussion that we just had. And I think this is a very important issue. We don't talk about it a lot. It's not so visible, but we can bring it in discussions like these closer to the heart of everyone. Maybe just a few words from the different areas. From India, I liked a lot, Samia, that you talked about bringing the government to the people. And it's always the other way around. People always have to move. But if we bring the government to the people, it's a very good start. And you talked a lot about the feedback that we need to give. We collect, but then what? What is the answer? What it was used for? What is the result? And the feedback culture that we need to bring in when we talk about data is very important here. And then the scaling. What comes from India can be used in South Africa, can be used in Tanzania, Kenya, and you referred to it, the panelists referred to it. I think it's a true South-South dialogue that we so much promote as well, and these are good examples that we should use more and promote more. Then from Kenya, thank you, Frida, for bringing the women at the center of the community and the discussion, that the community can decide what the questions are, and what you brought also to the discussion that was picked up after was the visibility of data. We can bring taboo questions with data without exposing the people to the public discussion. I think that is also a way something we can take away from Kenya. Then from Tanzania, the sensing the pulse of the people, what can we do? You said, well, the questions that we ask and how do we change the policy dialogue? And I think very important also for donors to bring to the discussion, we have to give credit to others sometimes if we want the discussion to move on. You mentioned that the government can take the credit, fair enough. Yeah. For us, the most important thing is that the agenda moves forward, and who takes the credit at the end of the day, that is not important for the people that we are all here to serve. We have, of course, a very close partnership with you, George, and I think this is working very well. We can still improve it, but I think the Google for data, I heard that. I haven't seen it in many of the other places that I've worked and have been to, but the visibility and the access and the communication about data and how we bring it to the people back, I think we work together on this here in Switzerland, and I hope that in other countries we will do the same. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That was an amazing summary, I think, of somebody who's really been listening. So thank you very, very much. Thank you to our virtual audience for listening, watching. Thank you for our audience here in Bern. And of course, thank you to our great speakers, Soima from India, Frida from Kenya, Aidan from Tanzania, and of course, George.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lunch is served.